local banker pleads guilty. I never thought I'd be at that point in my life. I was supposed to be at a meeting at 1. I missed that meeting. I was stuck at the casino. I had this urge that I could not stop. I was so far into debt and just nickel and diming everything that we had. And I had this urge, of course, to say, I'm going to go to the casino and I'm going to get out of this. I went to the casino probably for about 3 hours. I remember being on the casino floor. My heart was racing. I was sweating. I was there to solve a problem. I wasn't there to have fun.
Welcome back to the One Day at a Time podcast. Today's guest is Cade, and he's going to be sharing his story of gambling addiction and recovery. Cade, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Rob. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So how about we just dive right into it? What's brought you here today, and what's been going on?
So I am here today just to be a testimony of my gambling addiction. I definitely hit a really jagged rock bottom last year. I'm 435 days without a bet, so I'm in a great situation now. I'm at the point where I'm just kind of looking back to my time in gambling addiction to really uncover the what's and the whys and just be a voice for people in recovery.
I really appreciate you being here and being willing to do that. Let's go way back now through the beginning. Do you remember the first time you gambled?
I do. It was in college about 10 years ago. I worked at a bar with a bunch of my friends. It was a great environment. And I clearly remember the first time I bet. We had some tip money that we were given, and the bar closed, and we all sat around in the little casino and started gambling. It was my first time. It was probably only about $20, but for a college student, as you might relate, $20 goes a long ways. I put the $20 in, and I won, and it was great. It was this great euphoric feeling that I had, and that was day one. And it didn't get bad right away. It was obviously over time. I just think back to that day and what if I lost? Would my life be different? And unfortunately I won, and that was the start of it.
Unfortunately, I won is something only a problem gambler would say, but I can
100%. Yeah, nobody, if you're not in it, you don't get it. And that's why we're here today, right? Is to spread that awareness.
Absolutely. Something that you said, what the casino was in the bar that you were working at?
Yeah, so South Dakota, you've probably never been here. Most people haven't. There are casinos everywhere. Pretty much every bar has one, and it's big and it's bold and it's out there to get people in. Ironically, I just think this is funny also. I live in a small town, and I can see a casino from my driveway. So talk about looking your devil in the eye every morning. It's an interesting way to start your day.
Are these like tribal casinos, or are these like slot machines located inside the bars?
Yeah, just slot machines. We do have some reservations in South Dakota with some big casinos, but these are just small 15 to 40 machines, mom and pop shops, and they're everywhere. I mean, there's as many casinos as there is churches, it feels like.
Wow. Is it 21 to gamble?
It is, yes.
It is, okay. So I've seen some places where they will have a similar setup, but they'll call it lottery instead of casino. And so you can do it at 18, which, of course, the younger you start, the more likely you have a problem. So we're going back. It's the day that you're gambling with your friends at the bar. You win. What happens next? Do you start gambling again the next day? Is it the next week? Like, how does it start to progress?
Yeah, well, I probably won a good $200 that night. And again, speaking back to college, that's a lot of money. And I'm sure I went out and partied on the town and bought everybody drinks with this free money that I had. And yeah, I bet I was back at it the next day, and that was just the slow progression of the disease.
It's interesting that you say free money. What made you think it was free money?
You know, we never budget our casino money. We never budget our winnings. We talk about this a lot in Gamblers Anonymous. Like, we don't budget the money that we win to help ourselves. We use it for more ammunition to go out and play and stay active. I've heard you talk about that in the past. So I imagine I was right back in it. And again, that was about 10 years ago.
In terms of your work, were you only working at the bar, or did you have another job as well?
So in college at that time, I was just working at the bar. About a year later, I dropped out of college to pursue a career in banking. I didn't feel like my degree was going to help me more than it was gonna, and I made the choice to just kind of jump up into the job field.
So you got into banking without going for business school. You left school and went straight to work as a teller?
Yep, started as a teller and just found a lot of success. Started really building a career pretty quickly. Found a lot of success in it, and that was my career for about 9 years.
9 years. When you were working as a teller, was there, because I only asked this because I know a lot of people that have gotten into recovery from the banking space or the investment space. Was there ever a thought of like, I'm working with all this money, why don't I have more?
Oh, for sure. I mean, talk about the power of holding money in your hand, right? As an addict, that's your drug. I compare it to a bartender that's an alcoholic,
Yeah.
or a pharmacist that's addicted to opioids, right? It's a
Mm,
very scary situation to be in. I didn't feel it as much when I first started, but as
mm,
my addiction grew, it certainly became more of a challenge.
Let's talk about the addiction growing. So, right in the beginning, you have that win and then you're excited about it. Do you remember when things really started to ramp up for you in terms of the frequency of gambling?
Yeah, I'd say about year 7 when I was into it. So year 1 through 7, it was more the casual. I wasn't so drawn into it, but I would do it frequently. But
Mm,
I felt like I was controllable. And then, as we all know, there comes a point in time where your gambling becomes a hobby, that we
mm,
like to call it,
mhm.
into an addiction. And I would say about year 7, I finally started getting that momentum towards addiction, where I
Why?
wasn't gambling for fun. I started to grow in a family. I got
Mm,
married, or I was going to get married. I think there was a lot of outside pressure financially to pay for a wedding, to pay
mm,
for your children. And I just got consumed in that idea of, if I didn't do it all or pay for it all, I was a failure as a father and a
mm,
spouse. And I feel like just at year 7, that was where it aligned. And I was just getting desperate for the buck.
So it was financial based. It was kind of the outside pressures of feeling like you needed to get ahead?
Yeah, I think so. Keeping up with the Joneses. Again, working at a bank, you're seeing all this money all the time, these ultra successful people. And granted, I had some success in my career, but it wasn't on the scale to in which others had. And so, yeah, I feel financially there was some pressure. And now looking back, there was probably some things in my childhood, coming from a divorced household, not having my father around. The more I look into it, the more that there was probably some cues along the way.
Maybe like a feeling of wanting to prevent any kind of discomfort or harm for your family in the future and wanting it immediately.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the immediate aspect of it, 100%.
And so in year 7, is this still like slot machines or have you moved on to a different form of gambling?
I was in all forms of gambling. There's a casino, a big casino about 6 miles from my home. The slots, and then it was the tables, and then it was sports betting, and then ultimately gambling on my phone, which was probably the real big downfall.
Mhm.
I remember sitting next to my wife many times. We're trying to watch a movie as a family, and I'm on my phone. How sad of that to take me out of that moment. And
Mm.
she asked me what I was doing, and I just shrugged it off to something else. And at that time, I was probably gambling hundreds of dollars right next to my wife in plain sight.
I did the same thing sitting next to my family. I'd have my laptop kind of like on my lap, and then I would sit in the corner and kind of angle myself so that they
Yeah,
couldn't see what I was doing. But we'd be like
100%.
watching TV or a movie, and it would be consistent gambling, usually like really crap forms of gambling, like slots. But
Yeah,
it was
100%.
like that. One thing that I also did in my head, and I'm wondering if you did this too, was I separated the types of gambling where I viewed sports betting and blackjack as a viable means of making money and slots as a way of rewarding myself for my time. Do you feel like you separated the games in your head?
I think I probably use them all the same way. Yes, to get ahead financially, but I really think looking back to it, it was just the escape of
Hmm,
my present situation and not being proud of myself
hmm.
and constantly running away from the shame that I was feeling.
It's interesting because it sounds like you built yourself a successful career out of like literally just going from a dropping out of school, like basically not that it was nothing, of course, but saying from
Right.
0 to the top within your field. Why didn't it feel like enough?
I don't know. That's the big question, because it was enough. And that's been a lesson that I've learned through Gamblers Anonymous is what you have is enough.
Hmm.
And as much as I hate that I'm going through this recovery and my legal situation, we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. Yeah, it's just a terrible place to be, and
Hmm.
just so happy to be here and really learn how to enjoy the simple things in life again.
Yeah, I struggle with it as well. I asked that kind of knowing that we probably had a similar answer. I was in a similar situation where I was accomplishing the things I was supposed to accomplish on paper and feeling like that wasn't what I wanted. That's what everyone else wanted me to do. And what
Yeah,
I
so
wanted was this crazy
yeah.
success right away.
Yeah, and I'm a people pleaser, right? In banking,
Mm,
it's really about customer service and getting to know your people, and I think that's a huge part of it. Is I wanted some part of me had a desire to want to feel accepted and to be viewed as successful and just this perfect person, and
mm.
that's never going to be a realistic expectation that you can meet.
What do you think, before we go further on your timeline, what do you think made you believe that gambling was going to accomplish that for you? That if you won, like people would think you were a big shot? Was it kind of like that?
I think the biggest part of that is social media and
Mm,
people posting their experiences to the
mm,
average Joes, such as myself. So you see these people living these luxurious lives, going to the casino, winning tens of thousands of dollars. If I could just do that one time, I'd be set, right?
mm,
And ultimately, I got to that point where I was winning thousands of dollars, but I still felt the same, and I was
mm.
just chasing more. It was a really sad dead end.
That is probably one of the most frustrating things when it comes to a gambling problem, is like we have this idea that the big win's gonna make us feel good,
It
and then
makes
we
us
feel
feel good.
nothing.
I know, it's terrible, and then you just go back and spend it. It's just this crazy cycle. When you're in that mindset, you just don't have the clarity to understand, and I'm so thankful to understand it now.
Yeah, and I wanna talk about how we got to that point, but before we do, we're in year 7 now of a 10-year gambling stint. What happens between years 7 and 10 that gets you to finally leave it behind?
Yeah, I think just hitting rock bottom. I had no place to go. I had dug myself so far into the ground that there was no way up. I
Mm,
exhausted all financial means. I was just at rock bottom. I spent all my money. I recall at the very end of it, me and my wife were getting married the following year. I spent all the savings we had for our wedding. I
mm,
spent all the money we had for our bills and our childcare for the month. And I was in a state of panic and felt like I felt stuck.
mm.
And I always say I would have done anything at that time but tell somebody else. And that's an extremely powerful thing for me to look back at.
So your wife had no idea about the financial situation that you were in?
No, so as a banker, right? And here's another part of it. I had a lot of pressure on myself to feel like I was in charge and could be in charge of our finances because
Mm,
I'm a successful banker, right? It only makes sense. And she was a nurse and just didn't care to be involved at that time. Thankfully,
mm.
she is now, and that's a big part of my recovery plan. But yeah, it was crazy.
I imagine that I would feel a similar way in your position, especially, like, this is the job that I do, so I feel like I need to do it for our family as well.
Just killing your ego, right? Like
Yeah.
killing that ego was so hard to do, and I probably still struggle with it a little bit today.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, just fighting that ego off is priority number one. Yeah, just facing the shame is what I had to do.
What does that rock bottom look like for you? Do you remember the day that it kind of hit you in the
Of,
face?
of course, I do. I snuck away at lunch. I was supposed to be at a meeting at 1. I missed that meeting. I was stuck at the casino. I had this
Mm,
urge that I could not stop. I was so far into debt and just nickel and diming everything that we had. And I had this urge, of course, to say, I'm going to go to the casino and I'm going to get out of this. And
mm,
that definitely wasn't the case. I went to the casino probably for about 3 hours, self sabotaged until I couldn't sabotage anymore.
mm.
I remember being on the casino floor. My heart was racing. I was sweating. I was there to solve a problem. I wasn't there to have fun. As we know, when we gamble, the big lights, the fun games, they don't allow you to think consciously. They don't allow you to think strategically about anything but what the next bet's going to look like. So I remember just going crazy at the casino, lost everything, had no way out. I remember walking off the casino floor out into the parking lot, and as it usually did, that's when it hit me. My stomach sank in. I felt sick. I felt nauseous. I felt angry. I remember getting in my truck and just sitting in silence.
Mm,
I started to head home, and I call it the quietest loud ride home because the radio was off. I was screaming at myself in the truck, the negative self-talk. You're such a loser. How could you do this? You're a failure. Just the worst things you could speak to yourself. This is kind of a powerful statement, but I remember just not wanting to live anymore. I
mm.
was I was crying. I was at rock bottom. I didn't know what to do anymore.
Mm.
And ultimately that's kind of the big turning point in my gambling addiction, and that was rock bottom.
Thank you for sharing that, man. And I'll just kind of throw this point out there to make it really, really clear that you're not alone in this. I've
Yeah.
recorded 9 of these in the last 2 days,
Hmm.
and every single person said they considered taking their own life.
Yeah.
Every single one.
It's terrible, and it's terrible. And the crazier part is I remember coming home and my wife had no idea. I just
Mhm,
smiled and said, "Hey, how are you?" I
mm.
ran up to my kids. I acted like everything was okay. My smile was my mask, and that's you've talked about this in the past too. It's the hardest addiction to call out because you don't see it. Funny story, my first day at Gamblers Anonymous, they're like, "You're the first person that's ever walked in here smiling." And I kind of just laughed and I said, "Yeah, I'm just kind of a smiley guy, right?" But I think just looking back, I'd worn that mask for so many years
Mm,
that it was just natural for me to smile about it.
mm.
Smile when you're self-sabotaging and spending all your money. It's just such an odd idea and concept to look back at.
It is, but it's one that myself and likely a good portion of the audience viewing right now can relate to. That first Gamblers Anonymous meeting that you mentioned, was that right after the rock bottom point? That was the point that you decided to go get help?
It was about a month and a half after.
Okay.
So rock bottom wasn't the last time I gambled. The last time I gambled was probably about a month after that. I had
Mm,
just left my job. I was in between jobs, about to start a new one. So I had this free time. Obviously, didn't have the money to be doing it. I was unemployed at the time, but I was spending some time just trying to, again, recover my losses. And this
mm,
is kind of a funny story, too. I was at a casino. My wife was at work. The kids were at daycare. I had nothing to do. Probably had lots to do, but I convinced myself that I had nothing to do. I was at the casino and I was having a beer and just mindlessly just hanging out, just again blocking out all the problems I had in the world. I was gambling and I hear somebody say Cade. Like my heart just dropped. I didn't know
mm,
what it was. And I look up and it was my mother-in-law at the
mm.
casino. Talk about an oh shit moment that you have. And she goes, "Cade, what are you doing?" And I just paused and just almost started to cry. And I just said, "I don't know. I don't
Mm,
know what I'm doing anymore. I was just lost." And she said, "Let's get out of here." And I said, "Okay."
mm,
We went and sat her in a car. She started crying. I started crying. That was probably the saving point of my life. And I give a lot of thanks to my mother in law for making that hard step to come find somebody that's active in addiction and pull
mm,
them out of it and find them help. So I like to say that I just decided to stop gambling, but I was pulled out of it by my mother in law. And by the end of
mm.
the day, we were looking at rehab options and just trying to get my recovery plan started.
Was that the very first time that you told someone that you were struggling?
Yes, it was. My friends know that Kate likes to gamble, but again,
Mm.
did everything I could to just make it seem like it was just for fun. That was
Yeah.
the first point where I told somebody. The weight lifted off of telling her was the best thing ever, as hard as it was.
Mm.
And after that, it was just kind of this got the ball rolling on letting the important people know in my life.
And that right there is exactly why we need to have conversations like this, because for millions of people that could be struggling with a gambling problem of some severity, they think that they can just hide it until they solve it themselves. And what happens is that usually just builds up another problem and another problem. And then it
Yeah,
snowballs into a terrible situation where
yeah,
the best thing that you can do is the least attractive option, which is telling someone what's going on.
yeah.
If you didn't tell your mother-in-law that day what was going on, where do you think you'd be today?
I don't know, and that's so scary to think about. I'd be at a lot of a worse situation than I am now. I can't even imagine where I'd be. It had that much power over me that I just simply don't know, and I'm thankful that I don't know.
Me as well for you. I'm happy that you're
Yeah,
here, and I'm happy you're sharing this story.
yeah.
So, following that conversation, you decided to go and get some help. Did it kind of feel good right away, or was it a struggle in the beginning when you first gave it up?
Didn't feel good. I remember feeling so many emotions.
Mm,
And I think I was still just in the mindset of shame at that point. I remember, like, I'm a 30-year-old man being drug around by my mother-in-law to talk about rehabilitation facilities potentially and different options that the state provides. There's a lot of, I think, I don't know the statistics on men versus women in gambling, but as a man, it's so hard to ask for help. And I think I just battled my ego and my shame probably for about that first week until I finally made it to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting.
You think Gamblers Anonymous has worked up until this point?
Yeah, so I have not gone to rehab. I have not gone to inpatient or outpatient. My recovery is based solely on Gamblers Anonymous.
Mm,
I have gone pretty much every week for as long as the 435 days that I've been clean. Missed a couple weeks here and there, but
mm.
talk about a safe place. Gamblers Anonymous, I couldn't speak more highly of it, and I'm so excited to be active in my community with it. That was the first place I felt normal, and I'm sure you could probably relate to that. First moment of, oh my God, people understand me. And there's so much power in being understood when you're going through addiction.
Mhm.
And that first time I went, I smiled, I cried. We make commitments every Thursday night. My name's Cade. I'm a compulsive gambler. I made a commitment not to gamble. I've kept that commitment. There's a lot of power in committing to something in front of others that are going to hold you accountable.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's part of why I do this kind of content, right? If
Mhm.
I make this video and then I go and relapse, all of a sudden people will question the authenticity and the value of this video.
Yep. So that's a huge part of it. And yeah, just a great group of people.
Yeah.
They become family, and it's just, you just need that. Somebody in recovery just needs that support, unbiased support. They're not loving you because they're your dad. They're not loving you because you're their husband. They're loving you because you're struggling and they've struggled and can understand.
Yeah, we're most qualified to help the people that we used to be. And I'm sure that a year and a half or a little bit more than that into your recovery now, you've seen people come into those meetings where you can relate to where they're at on day one and you try
Yeah.
to leverage your story to help them out. And dude, you're a great storyteller. So I'm sure that you've been making a world of difference in your meetings. Do you feel
I
like
like so.
going and doing that has helped you, not just what you've received, but being able to help others has helped you stay clean?
Yeah, 100%. That's my passion. That's why I reached out to you, Rob. It's the passion that I have, and I love seeing your passion for it. When there's a new person at a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, my eyes just light up. I can't
Mm,
wait to talk to that person and get to know them, hear a little bit of their story, share my testimony, and just hopefully leave a first impression on that night that says, I got to come back.
mm.
That group was great. That Cade guy, so interesting to talk to. Yeah, that's just my passion. And really moving on from today on, like, my sole mission is to help people that
That's
are
awesome.
struggling, and not only help them, but help their families understand and support the recovering addicts.
I don't want to paint a picture that every day is a perfect day. Now in recovery, we have a chance to be happy, but do you still have struggles that you're dealing with as a result of the gambling today?
Yeah, gosh, the biggest struggle I face is a legal issue resulting from my gambling addiction. On April 3rd of this last year, I was indicted for bank embezzlement at the bank that I worked at. I'm still facing some legal consequences from my actions at that time. Obviously, when that happened, it would have really been easy to just quit gambling at that time, and that wasn't the case. Looking back on the day of the offense, that was, we talked about my rock bottom earlier. That was on that kind of that same day, and I go to court on November 25th
Mm,
for sentencing from my actions, and I'm facing potentially, they say, up to 30 years. On the news article, I was on the news, and that's a good talking
mm.
point too, as someone that's really involved in their community. Um, I probably face about 4 to 10 months in prison. I'm really praying from the good things that I've been doing and paying the money back that hopefully I'll be on probation and be able to be out in the community helping others still.
I hope so too, because a big aspect of what I hope to see going forward is something that a couple of friends of mine are working on, which is a diversion court for problem gamblers. A lot of times, as problem gamblers, that we get to this point where there's only really a couple of outcomes, one of which is committing a crime in order to continue to gamble.
Yep.
And a lot of people that do that are good people that have this mindset of it's not stealing because I'm going to put it back, and you're good people, but we're making bad decisions to fuel this terrible addiction. And so I hope to
Yeah.
see a situation where you can continue to keep doing good in your community, because I'm sure that in the 435 days since your last bet, things have changed drastically.
Yeah,
So,
that's the point. Like, life is great right now.
mm,
We're getting the money back. We're getting ourselves in a better situation. Really setting goals as a family, and that's so nice to have people help you with that. Right, doing it by yourself is just not a winnable situation. But yes, I think the point I want to make is people talk about prison at Gamblers Anonymous, and that's where it could lead. And it was this big reality of, oh my God, Cade, when you finally snap out of it, right? The shame in that, man, was the worst thing I've ever felt. Just about 2 months ago, it was all over the news in my community. Local banker pleads guilty. I never thought I'd be at that point in my life. I just cried. I broke down, turned off my phone, and just hid for a day. But the beauty of that was seeing the response from people. When you're in addiction and you're hiding and you're shameful, you think and are convinced that no one could love you. You're not lovable. You're a bad person. All the bad things that you tell yourself. But the beauty of it is, and I want this to be known for people, is that if you do ask for help, people are going to love you, and they're going to love you more, and you're going to be so overwhelmed with that love that you don't even know what to do because you have felt loveless for the longest time. So the great thing is it opened my eyes to be like, hey, you're okay. You're not a loser. You're not a bad person. And like you said, you did a bad thing, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we're going to get there.
When you talk to people that go to meetings, there's a certain way of communicating that you start to hear. I don't know if you can relate to this, but there's people that you meet in meetings and they look quiet. They look like, some of them look like rough characters. Not that you do, but some of them look like rough characters. And then they start speaking like so eloquently, like they're on a soap opera, but it's so good. It's so concise.
They're so wise. Some of them are so wise. And one part I like to point out too is gambling can take over the life of anybody. And what I mean by that is, I'm a banker. We have CPAs in Gamblers Anonymous. We have a pastor. We have lawyers. It can get to anybody, and that's a really scary thing, especially for the people that are in those careers where you're supposed to have it all together and be the good guy. You are the good guy, but you're just doing bad things through the addiction.
Right. You're not really yourself when you're gambling. I thought of a PSA that I never made, but you know, like those Snickers commercials where the people are really hungry and then they say you're not yourself when you're hungry.
Yeah.
I want one that says you're not yourself when you're gambling, and have it be like a father like sitting with his family, and then it flashes to him at the casino, and it's like a very different character.
For sure. This is a far off thought, but I think there's a big opportunity in the cinematic world to make a movie about that and have a powerful statement out that, and really point to those parts where you're sitting at the kitchen table and your daughter's telling you about her day at school, and it's just background noise because you're just thinking about what to do next, how to get out of the situation, where the next dollar is coming from. And it's a very odd thing to think about.
If you could go back and have a conversation with yourself at year 7, note that you can't just say stop gambling, what would you tell yourself?
The first thing I would do, and I say this to my dad all the time, is what I would love to do is just go back to that year and just hug the broken me, because that's what I needed, was someone just to hug me and tell me it was going to be okay. And that's what I'd tell my past self. I would say it's going to be okay. Ask for help. You need it. Your family needs it. And everything's going to be okay. And you're still lovable. That's what I'd tell myself.
Would you have listened to yourself?
I mean, if I came back as like Cade from the future, who's dealing with what I'm doing now, 100%, I would say, Cade, this is where this is leading you. But if it was more vague than that, I would hope that I would listen to myself. But easier said than done. Because when you're in the addiction, you're not going to get help unless you feel like you're ready to get that help. And I wasn't ready to get that help at that time, unfortunately.
And for someone that's on the fence about whether or not they want to leave gambling behind, it's bringing problems into their life, but they're still enjoying it. What can you tell them the best part about leaving it behind has been?
Oh, there's so many good things about leaving it behind. You are just going to feel joy. That's not a feeling gamblers feel. I feel joy in the small things again. Listening to my daughter's story about her day, watching a movie, doing nothing. I have joy in my life. I have optimism for my future. I have goals. You'll be able to go out and do the things you want to do, and you're just going to live a better, healthier life, and you're just going to be so thankful that you got the help.
If you're watching right now and you feel like you're struggling with a gambling problem, then watch this video to learn how I left gambling addiction in the past, and let's keep getting better together, one day at a time.